Hello everyone, you are watching the channel Incredible Facts. During the long period of military confrontations, many astonishing and shocking developments have been created. Just look at the electromagnetic gun which hits a man with a heat ray, the project of aircraft carriers made of real ice, ekranoplan, and so much more. Today we made a list of 10 most unusual military developments of all time. Habakkuk. At the very beginning of World War II, Great Britain was faced with a shortage of essential resources, which led to the launching of quite daring experiments. So, in the field of warship construction, various alternatives to metal were suggested, including special materials based on ordinary water ice. In the future, it was suggested to build a series of cheap and mass aircraft carriers from such material. The program of ice ships development was codenamed Habakkuk. Calculations showed that the ice ship will be cheaper than a metal one and will not require deficit materials. In addition, the solid ice hull turned out to be more stable in a battle situation. However, soon enough it became clear that simple ice would not fully meet the existing requirements. An ordinary iceberg would have cracks, would not rise above the water, and would melt if the weather was warm. It was decided to use picrite, which was a frozen blend of sawdust or other fibrous material and water in the ratio of 1:6 by weight. Despite the ambitious plans, there was another meeting in December 1943 where it was decided to stop the development of the ice aircraft carrier. This decision was due to a number of factors. First of all, the project turned out to be too bold and complicated, so it could cost too much. The engineers were unable to avoid extensive use of scarce. Lund class. The Lund class ekranoplan is a former top-secret Soviet naval ship capable of gliding directly over waves at the speed of a jet plane, while dodging radar and anti-ship mines. This is a dynamic hovercraft. The ship moves using the screen effect over the water surface without constant contact with it, and is held in the air by aerodynamic lift generated on the wings and hull. 6 Mosquito anti-ship missile containers are mounted above the ship's hull at an angle to the horizon. Aircraft carriers were declared the main target of the missile carrier. The ship, due to its high speed, 500 km per hour, and invisibility to radars, could approach aircraft carriers at a distance of a precise missile launch. Flying altitude was from 1 to 5 meters and the range up to 2,000 kilometers. After the collapse of the USSR and the shutdown of the Lund-class production program, this ship docked at a well-protected dock on the Dagestan coast. Tsar tank. The Tsar tank was a combat vehicle designed by Nikolai Lebedenko in Russia in 1914 to 1915. The vehicle was constructed and tested in 1915. It was remarkable. No one had ever known the constructor who proposed to create the world's largest tank. Its tactical and technical characteristics were ahead of its time. The hull was almost 18 meters long and its width was 12 meters. Armor type rolled steel. The engine type, Maybach, aviation carburetor high-speed armament, 2 Caponier guns of 76.2 caliber with ammunition for 60 shots, plus several machine guns, Maxim of 7.92 caliber with ammunition from 8 to 10,000 bullets. In August 1915, the first tests took place. The Tsar tank started off, drove off the log planking, and suddenly stopped. The back roller fell into a deep hole. The driver pressed on the gas, but nothing happened. The commission made a conclusion. The tank was not suitable for cross-country driving. For 8 years, the Tsar tank stood in the woods. There was no way to move it from its place. And in 1923, when the new government was in power, it was scrapped. Paris gun. The Paris gun, also known as the Colossal or Emperor Wilhelm's trumpet, was the most mysterious, the most extraordinary, and the most useless German siege weapon in World War I. It had an unusually short lifespan of only 6 months between March and August 1918. This weapon managed to attack only one populated area, the French capital, Paris, which is how it got its name. The Paris gun was the longest gun in the history of artillery. Its barrel length reached 33 meters, 157 caliber. To produce the Paris gun, the barrels of the 38-centimeter SK-L45 Max railroad howitzer, better known as the Long Max, were used. The barrels were sharpened, and then the rifle inserts were inserted and attached, reducing the caliber of the barrel from 380 to 210 millimeter. The long barrel provided unprecedented muzzle velocity of 1,600 meters per second and allowed the shells of the Paris gun to reach heights of up to 40 kilometers, reaching the lower stratosphere. Before the creation of rocket equipment, this was the highest altitude to which a man-made aircraft could climb. Fugo. The fire balloons, codenamed Fugo, was a weapon created by Japan during World War II. Filled with hydrogen, the 12-kilogram aerostat carried a 15-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation bomb and 4 5-kilogram incendiary munitions. The balloons were supposed to be a cheap weapon that would reach the United States on rising air currents and spread havoc in Canadian and American cities, forests, and farmland. Balloons were relatively ineffective weapons, but were used in only a few attacks on North America during World War II. Between November 1944 and April 1945, Japan launched more than 9,300 fire balloons. About 300 bombs from such balloons were found or observed in North America. The Fugo is traditionally considered the first intercontinental guided weapon in history, a precursor to intercontinental missiles. Bat bomb. The mouse bomb is the smallest, 17 grams, aviation bomb in history. It was produced in prototype series. It never entered into service. A variant of biological weapons. The weapon was intended to defeat Japanese cities where buildings were often made of fire-resistant materials. In the X-ray project, it was planned to attach small incendiary bombs with a delayed action mechanism to the bodies of bats and keep them at a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius, at which the bats go into hibernation. The bats, waking up after landing, would scatter over the territory, get into hardly accessible areas of flammable Japanese buildings and, once ignited, spread panic. To test the effectiveness of the device, a typical Japanese village was built in 1943 in the desert and bats with bombs were dropped on it. The bats successfully delivered the bombs to the buildings and a government commission ruled that the device was effective. The next day, the Air Force chiefs conducted an inspection of the new weapon at the Carlsbad Air Base where several of the bomb bats suddenly came out of hibernation and flew away, hiding in wooden hangars at the base. As a result, these buildings burned to the ground. The Americans then decided to use the more traditional incendiary bombs. Vomit gun. This weapon is capable of completely disabling a person's ability to resist without causing him any irreparable injury. It actually looks like a flashlight consisting of a series of LEDs. It emits a series of extremely bright, fast, and well-focused multicolored random impulses. The human eye tries to focus on the same frequency, but all LEDs have different frequencies. This affects the nervous system a lot, causing headaches, disorientation, visual impairment, nausea, and, in fact, vomiting. After a few minutes, the effect subsides, making this weapon ideal for capturing the targets without damaging it. The gun was developed by Intelligent Optical Systems, which received an $800,000 contract from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The prototype was finished in 2007 when tests began, during which the disadvantages of the device were revealed. That is, it does not always work. On some test persons, the weapon had no effect at all, which put a question mark on its effectiveness. After this, the U.S. government was forced to terminate the program. active denial system. The Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate of the U.S. Department of Defense developed an electromagnetic gun capable of firing a powerful thermal beam at a distance of up to 1 kilometer. The gun, called the active denial system, also known as the pain beam, can be placed on a vehicle and used, in particular, to the crowd's dispersal. The weapon was successfully tested on 11,000 people, and only 2 cases resulted in second-degree burns. According to one of the Marines who took part in the test, the active denial system creates heat like an open oven. He said standing under the beam makes you instinctively want to run away. The active denial system was developed at a cost of $120 million by the Defense Department. Goliath. World War II was not only a place of loss and destruction, but also a huge testing ground for the creation of all sorts of weapons. And sometimes these weapons look quite unusual, but at the same time, they worked reliably and effectively. Among the German innovations was one very interesting machine, the Goliath self-propelled tracked mine. The German automation manufacturer Burgward made a real robot, as Goliath was sometimes called. The invention was a tracked self-propelled mine that could run both electrically and on gasoline, and was remotely controlled. During combat operations, the Goliath was used as an anti-tank weapon, but its main activity was to destroy the enemy's defensive engineering structures. The robot could be put into action immediately after its delivery to the battlefield. Its small size made it easy to hide in an ambush. The principle of the mine's function was simple. The target was chosen, the Goliath approached the object, and being close to the target, was detonated. Panjendram. The Panjendram, also known as the Great Panjendram, was a massive jet-propelled cart with explosives developed by the British military during World War II. Before the Allied landings in Normandy, commanders were extremely concerned about the possibility of destroying the coastal fortifications. There was a real danger that the attack of the landing force would be stopped at the beach. Every possibility was discussed as a solution to the problems with the coastal fortifications. One of the proposed projects was the Great Panjendram. It was a large cylinder with 2 wheels, 3 meters in diameter, attached to it. In appearance, the structure was similar to a giant coil. The cylinder was supposed to contain a large explosive charge, and the wheels were supposed to spin by primitive rocket engines attached around the circumference of the wheel. When the Great Panjendram reached the beach and activated its rocket engines, it had to reach speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, and sweeping away everything along its way, heading for the concrete fortifications. When it reached the concrete wall, the explosives detonated and a gap appeared in the fortification, and the troops rushed there. But alas, the tests showed the extreme instability of such a construction. The problem was that it was extremely difficult to set the exact direction of such a mechanism. That's all, friends. Thanks for watching. Write in the comments which of the developments you liked the most. Also, click the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new interesting videos.